Can I retire with $1.5 million in an IRA at the age of 62? Today we're going to go through a case study. This one was actually sent from one of you that watch. It's from Reddit, which is a public forum. So I'm just going to read through this, and this should be a lot of fun. And then we're going to hop right into the planning, just kind of an analysis on this. So the title of this post is "Your Advice is Appreciated." It's on the F.I.R.E blog on Reddit. It says, hoping to get anyone's advice on retirement and financial situation. Age 62, spouse, age 64. Estimate will both live until 90. As far as current assets, it mentions he's got an IRA of $1.5 million, checking $60,000, and then a residence here of $933,000. So total $2.49 million, almost $2.5 million in assets. And then as far as liabilities, he mentions $445,000 on a mortgage, and he's got student loans of $25,000. So a little bit more. He says currently working in a very stressful job, want to retire by December, may not have more than $20,000 per year from income from side consulting. I want to spend at least the next 10 years traveling, enjoying relatively good health. This is very common. A lot of people are getting very burnt out in some of the jobs they're working. They're really seriously considering what an early retirement or what spending more during those next 10 years might look like. He also mentioned that, hey, both my parents are age 87. They have said multiple times, I'll be getting a $1 million inheritance that is currently in their IRA, and would expect to receive that within the next 8 years. Now, inheritances, I don't always like to fully rely on them in a plan. I want to make sure you have a solid plan regardless of inheritance, but it is something that needs to be factored in, right? Something that I'm going to show you as we kind of go through some of the analysis here. We live in Charleston area, and our home continues to appreciate. Advisor says they expect our home will double in value in the next 10 years. Very well could be. Who knows? So questions here. Should I be able to retire comfortably and travel for the next 10 years? Maybe spend around $12,000, $15,000 per month for the next 10 years, which includes all expenses, mortgage, healthcare, travel, and then can I quit my job this year and not have to stress about ever running out of money? Should I take Social Security at 62 versus 67? Would appreciate anyone's thoughtful advice. Thanks. So the first thing I can completely empathize with is the idea of working a highly stressful job and retiring and dying with a big nest egg is actually something that very few people really even think about at this point. And these are really good questions to ask. When do I take Social Security? How much can I spend? So I did take some of the basic numbers from this post. We're going to go in and test some of these numbers of monthly spending, downsizing, how an inheritance might affect an early retirement. And by the way, none of this is advice for the person that wrote this. Obviously don't know their full situation. We have limited information, but I think that a lot of you that are watching might have a similar situation where you do want to get out of that corporate job and you do want to know what an early retirement might look like. So let's look at the first question, which should I be able to comfortably retire and spend around $12,000 to $15,000 per month in retirement? So let's go through their situation now. Okay, so if we look at their current financial picture, about $1.5 million in an IRA here. He's got about $60,000 in bank accounts, just his overall checking, and then their home, which is worth around $33,000. As far as liabilities, he said he's got a mortgage of around $445,000. And by the way, at least in this plan, we're going to be a little bit generous here, saying, hey, maybe he was one of the lucky ones that had a refinance when rates were lower. Of course, we're kind of throwing the paint on the wall. He didn't give any details on what the mortgage is, but it's all going to kind of factor in what his monthly spend is going to be when we're planning this out. And of course, we don't know his current income as of today, but we're gonna fast forward and jump ahead to January of next year and go through some different assumptions for what this might look like. Okay, so like you mentioned, what he has to spend from, at least asset-wise, is that IRA. It's around $1.5 million. I'm gonna make some assumptions here. Let's just assume that he's invested in more of a 60-40 type portfolio. Of course, this isn't any sort of recommendation, but the reason why I'm just choosing that initially, because that's gonna be about 5 years in bonds, and safer assets during those down years to have and pull from income. Some other assumptions here, right? This actually is an assumption, but overall, based on the post, he's got about 100% of all his assets that we're going to be generating retirement income from in tax-deferred accounts. So any dollar that comes out is going to be taxable. And then, of course, his overall net worth here is around $2.1 million. We already went through some of the balance sheet. Some other things that we're going to factor in here. Let's say he mentioned, hey, I think we're going to live to about age 90. That's fine. Usually I like to keep a little bit more of a buffer when I'm doing plans for folks, but in their case, we're going to assume the plan's going to be around 28 years, so he's going to live longer than around 35% of people that are his age. By the way, we're calling him Bob and Sue. Of course, this isn't not their actual names here. So let's see how this all kind of factors into what sort of monthly income we can start with. And then we're going to go through and we're actually going to test this plan and see what it looks like. So what you're looking at on my screen, especially what income might look like in that first year of retirement in 2025. He mentioned he wanted to spend between $12,000 and $15,000 per month. I'm going to just choose smack dab in the middle, average about $13,500 in net income, right? The one thing he mentioned was 12 to 15. Remember, we have to get a net income. Taxes are going to be a big factor because all the retirement income that he's getting is coming from an IRA. So the way we're calculating this, he mentioned in the post that he's going to get around $4,000 in his Social Security. I'm making a big assumption that maybe that's split 50-50 between him and his partner. But for now, we're going to say if he decided to take it early, we're going to say he started next year, he's going to get around $3,200. We're just going to assume that for next year. As far as other income, he said he could probably make maybe a little less than $20,000 per year in side consulting. So we're also going to assume that he's going to get around $1,500 per month on average from consulting. And the rest of the money is going to have to come from his IRA, right? So as far as gross income, right, before we take out taxes, it's going to be around $16,300 to come to that net income amount of $13,500. So let's look at how this all looks kind of more in practice in that first year. That's going to look like around $140,000 or so coming from the IRA. They're going to have just under $40,000, again, assuming Social Security there, $40,000, and then the consulting income around $18,200, just under $20,000 to meet their expenses, right? The expenses of that $16,500 in gross income we have to make up for because, again, taxes are going to be a factor when we're taking money out of IRAs. I also made an assumption as far as the mortgage payment. Let's assume the mortgage is around $27,000 per year just of principal and interest. And then you're also going to see the student loan payment and Medicare premiums for his partner here. So let's put this all together and stress test this. And let's start to look at what spending $13,500 in net income throughout retirement would look like if they decide to retire at the end of next year and they live through some of the worst market periods in history. And I also want to preface that the withdrawal strategy that we're going to test here is not a simple 4% rule where you just adjust for inflation and take 4% for the rest of your life. I can already tell that this level of income would not be ideal to use a strategy like that. But what we are testing is more of a dynamic withdrawal strategy where you're more flexible and able to increase or decrease income slightly inevitably when you hit those bear markets in a 30-year retirement period. So let's see how much income they could have fared starting with the dot-com bubble. So the chart you're looking at on my screen now is essentially what would happen with that asset mix, with their retirement horizon, with their sources of income, and what that would look like if he decided to retire right before the dot-com bubble, which is a pretty historically awful time for the stock market. So the blue line that you're looking at here is total income, and the other line is the planned income, right? If things go smoothly, what planned income might look like. And you'll start to see as we get closer to 2001, when this all started to kind of happen here, there's a little bit of divergence. The red line is when you would expect to cut income. We'd want to cut income because risk has gone up and your portfolio has gone down. But the difference is the first income cut is around $1,000 per month, right? But it starts to get worse. Then we're down $2,000 per month. $2,900, $3,900, where by 2005 there's such a big gap around $3,100 that you really cannot sustain that level of income in order to spend that. And actually, if we continue going on, it gets to really unsustainable levels where eventually down the line you're spending around half of the planned income that you expect to spend. And also, if we look at the overall account balance and how this looks when we're looking at the account balance, we could see that the upper guardrail starts pretty well. Your balance is around 1.6. We could see that the lower guardrail is around 1.46. So when your portfolio drops to that's when we want to start lowering and reducing income. But he's taking out so much income throughout the course of the plan that eventually, by the time 2024 hits, really your overall balance is probably pretty depleted at that point. And let's also test one more really horrible period for the stock market, and that's the stagflation era. U.S. inflation was 14% in 1980, and interest rates were around 17% in 1981. You can imagine it would not be a fantastic time to start your retirement. And once again, we're seeing these periods where the actual income that he'd be taking is much, much less than we planned out. And once again, it's dropping to really unsustainable levels where you have to take $5,000 less in income than you really plan to. And once again, we're at a point where your total balance at the end of the plan is super low, right? It's pretty unsustainable. So overall, again, I don't know the full picture, but this type of spending wouldn't really give me a 10 out of 10 confidence of an early retirement. It seems like this level of spending would leave a serious mark on your portfolio. Again, I'm looking at some of the worst periods of history to test this, but unless you can live on half of that starting income, I'm not sure this would be the right direction to take. But that leads us to the next point, because I think the point they were trying to make, at least in the post, is, they more so want to take advantage of the go-go years of retirement, and a lot of people do. And they realistically start to cut back spending and downsizing in about 10 years. And at that point, they would only need to spend around $6,000, is at least what they say. So let's assume all the same facts as before, except for add the variable of downsizing their home and no longer having a mortgage, and seeing what that might look like with an early retirement. All right, so let's look at the same picture, but now look at what the numbers look like if they decide to downsize their home. Again, we're gonna make a lot of assumptions here just for fun, of course, but let's assume in 2035, right, they were able to sell their home for around $1.2 million. Again, we're just gonna assume that it's growing at 3% for now for the next 10 years. I know they mentioned it would double, but we're gonna be a little bit more conservative here. We're also gonna assume that they were able to downsize and buy another home for around $650,000 at that point, right? So you can see that here. And then after selling the home, I also want to mention that we're adding in the Section 121 exclusion. Plus, I'm going to assume that their cost basis, so the amount they bought the home for was around $250,000. So $750,000 is going to be excluded as far as what's considered a gain. So again, just to give you kind of some behind the scenes of what I'm putting in the numbers here. So as far as what they net, right, after they sell the home, after they pay the mortgage, after they pay out taxes, any capital gains taxes on it, the amount they're going to be able to net and save and put towards savings is around $150,000. Like, we're making a lot of assumptions here. And then the next year, now we're going to start to assume their expenses do cut back down to the $6,000 per month. Again, this is adjusted for inflation over the next 10 years, but also they have no more liability. So now they sold their home, they downsize, their expenses are cut. Let's see how this looks if we do another one of those stress tests through some of the worst markets in history. Okay, so once again, let's test what would happen if they retired right before the dot-com bubble, just to compare apples and apples here. Their income actually looks pretty decent for a while. They do have a little bit of hiccups here and there where, yeah, they don't retire into a fantastic market, but then we're back on plan in 2006 here. You'll notice this big, large jump right here. This would be assuming, hey, they sold their home and downsized about 10 years after retirement. The way this would look in practice, we'd say, yeah, they're taking pretty significant income over the first 10 years of the plan. You can see their portfolio's dropping pretty significantly, but then all of a sudden in the year 2009, they sell that home, they downsize, and now their expenses are cut in half here. So selling the home really does save the plan here. They're spending a lot of money up front, but it looks like when they sell the home that it gets a little bit more normalized because they don't quite have to spend as much money. And if we run again with the stagflation era, this one looks a little bit different where income's a little bit all over the place, where you're having years where you are spending a lot less, of course, because inflation was so bad. And then once again, the portfolio is saved by the bell. It's saved by selling the home and downsizing about 10 years into it. But this one, again, it looks like there's a decent amount of adjustments they have to make if they do go with the strategy where they're spending a lot of money for the first 10 years of retirement, really depending on that downsize. So once again, this option does look a lot better when it comes to downsizing, and I'm purposely choosing some of the worst times in history because if I were them, I wouldn't want to be caught flat-footed. You want to expect the best, but sometimes plan for the worst. But we're not done yet because there's one last factor they mentioned in the post that would also be useful for a lot of you understanding, and it's on top of downsizing, but it's also what would happen if they inherited $1 million IRA. How would that work? Because inheritances are a factor. Most of the time it's not ideal to make this like the savings grace in your plan, but it's absolutely worth taking a look at. What sort of impact might that have on your plan? So we're going to assume that in about 8 years, which is his words, what he stated, that he's going to inherit a IRA and it's going to be growing for 10 years and we're going to adjust it for inflation. We're going to see what that looks like. So let's assume in about 8 years he's able to inherit that IRA, but unfortunately there's a catch when it comes to inheriting these many IRAs. And the catch is that you can't just hold on to the IRA and take 4% and live happily ever after. No, the IRS wants their piece of the pie. Over a 10-year period, at least the way the current tax law works now, is you have to fully deplete that IRA over that 10-year period from the time you inherit it. So you can see in the first year, we're assuming in 2032 that this happens, he'd be taking income from the IRA instead of his own IRA, because we want to take income from an asset that you have to withdraw from. And then you can see as we continue on here, he's taking $212,000, $230,000, and you can see that's more income than he needs, right? Especially in the year after he sells the property and he downsizes. He's has around $140,000 in extra income that he's going to have to be putting away and paying taxes on, because that IRA, again, has to be depleted over that 10-year period until finally, he has a $316,000 distribution from the inherited IRA in 2039, just the way this account works here. So this is gonna be the last one we're gonna stress test. Again, taking a lot of money up front in those first 10 years, then downsizing, and then inheriting $1 million IRA. Of course, the big thing you can't control is when you receive that inheritance. Personally, everyone's different. This isn't a recommendation. I would really want to focus on downsizing as far as banking on that inheritance happening during that time. So the last scenario, it looks a lot rosier, where the amount of income you're able to take, of course, because you have a beneficiary IRA coming in the next 10 years, makes the plan look a lot better. But still, you're going through that period where the first 10 years of retirement, you're taking some pretty significant withdrawals, and then it sort of starts to normalize later on. And finally, if you look at the stagflation era, you are taking income pretty significantly early on. Again, later on, there's still those points where you have to take a lot of income because the IRA is having to be fully depleted over that 10-year period. But nonetheless, it looks a lot better than option one. Now, we just went through a lot of items. I don't want to get you in any sort of analysis paralysis. I really just want to keep things simple. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, like health insurance, Medicare, tax planning, but I don't want you to get super overwhelmed. What I want you to take away here is that, this ignores what the actual mortgage is, the specific expenses, what sort of investment risk tolerance. I also mentioned Social Security, but is that a combined benefit? Is that just Bob's benefit? What happens if something were to happen to one of them? So what happens? You can't spend the same $13,000 per month. The plan will need to change. But if Bob and Sue decide to come to me, I'd ask them these questions. What does downsizing look like? When should you do it? And can you realistically cut your expenses in half if you want to? And then spending more in the early parts of retirement usually makes a lot of sense while you have your health and wealth. And what we know is that the research is that does pretty much happen in reality. But when it comes to the downsizing and the inheritance, those are two variables you really want to make sure you dial in before you make this big jump to retirement. The second is this, and it really does come down to when you are retiring early, is being able to be flexible. If you retire and you retire into great markets, you could probably spend more, but you need to also be able to cut back when markets do decline. And with the first spending level, we'd have to cut it back several levels that would probably be pretty unsustainable. I love the die with zero mentality, but I want you to be alive with zero. Thirdly, I really recommend you talk with a planner or find a great system or software that you can really stress test this and give you more confidence and direction, because this is a big decision. You only want to do this retirement thing once, and I don't want you to have to go back to work because you're overspending. Once again, this is Matt. I'm a certified financial planner advisor over at One Degree Advisors. If you'd like to talk to me or someone on my team about your financial plan, you can click the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.